Hello and welcome to the Rangers Review Morning Briefing. I'm Jonny McFarlane. Joining me today is Joshua Barry. Welcome, Josh. It's been a while since the fabulous duo that we're on together. So welcome. It's good to see you. How are you feeling?
Good, mate. Yeah. Just now acclimatising to this winter break that we have. Like the players, but apart from we don't get time off, we plough through. So no, I've had a good Christmas. And already looking forward to, as I said to Derek, Aberdeen away in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, let's have a quick chat about some transfer news. It was breaking last night in the Daily Record that John Souttar is still on Rangers' radar, that Giovanni van Bronckhorst is continuing interest in the player that was there when Steven Gerrard was in charge, which makes sense, Joshua, if you think about it in terms of the way the club is set up. Ross Wilson will have a list of targets that he feels fits the criteria of what a Rangers player is, that fits the criteria of what the club is looking for. And John Souttar, available, of course, on a free. Scotland International, knows the league. Would obviously be a player that would be of interest, especially given Connor Goldson's contract situation. You'd probably be hard-pressed to find someone now who believes Connor Goldson's going to remain at Ibrox. Looks pretty obvious that the plan for him is to move on in the summer on a free transfer with what would be a very, very lucrative transfer. And that would obviously leave a space to fill. Now, listen, I may be proved wrong. Connor Goldson could turn around and sign a deal tomorrow or in the next week or so. All I would say is it's absolutely extremely rare for a player to run down their contract to basically January to sign a new deal at that point. It just doesn't happen very often in my experience. Joshua, what do you make of John Souttar? We've discussed him before. You've obviously written about him. Is it a no-brainer?
I think when you take it all together in terms of knowing the league, stylistically, what type of player he is, you look at the season he's had so far. Certainly more positives than negatives if you're Ross Wilson weighing them up. I guess it's all about the partnerships at the back as well. We've spoken as well about how Souttar maybe lacks the turn of pace that Goldson does, but there's certain things you can do to accommodate that in the back four. Depending on what players are playing alongside him. Calvin Bassey, for example, has really good pace, and that's been shown. Equally, I think playing centre back for Rangers is different from Hearts, not just in terms of the obvious, but you look at the game against St Mirren and how high Rangers pressed St Mirren in that first 45 minutes. They were playing 30 yards from their goal. It's a specific requirement to be comfortable doing that, operating up high up the field. As we've seen with Goldson in a few recent games, stepping into the midfield, especially given the space that's now opened up with only one deep midfielder. But saying that, I think Souttar's really comfortable on the ball. We've seen in the reverse, the last game between Hearts and Rangers at Tynecastle, that he was comfortable switch and play. So I think it's one of these transfers that might just make sense, given there would be no fee as well. There's not a huge risk attached to it.
Got John Dooley there asking a question, and guys, I would encourage you to come in and hit us with questions, because we have got plenty of space on the podcast today to answer your questions, so fire in anything that you have. John Dooley, is there any news on Connor Goldson's contract situation? No, John. The latest is the club are comfortable as it stands with how Goldson's situation is panning out. They're quite happy for him to run down his deal. They want him to sign another deal, but I don't think there's any suggestion that they will cash in. I think they're quite happy with how he's performed under Giovanni van Bronckhorst. I think he's been pretty solid, and I think if it's going to be one of two options, it will be that he'll leave at the end of the season or he will sign a new deal, and there is a new deal there on the table for him. However, I don't think Rangers are keen to break the wage structure. I think they've been public about that, and I think what Connor Goldson's looking for would be a big contract for the club. So I think everybody's at a situation where they know where they stand, and we just have to see how it pans out. But there is no news, and I don't expect there is going to be any news anytime soon. Josh, anything you want to add to that?
Just that I think the Goldson situation, although it kind of, he lost a bit of popularity, I'd say, with some of his comments at points earlier in the season. I think he would be, he's one of the most difficult players to replace in the starting 11, because just how many things he can do in the pitch in terms of his distribution, his stepping into midfield, which has increased, his ability to command the back line, his strength in one-on-one duels. This is a player that Rangers were only able to sign at what would be, I guess, a reduced fee because he hadn't played much. I think if Connor Goldson was coming to Rangers off the back of a couple of years in the Premiership, naturally he'd have cost a lot more. But it wasn't really his fault that he wasn't able to fulfil that due to the health scare that he had. So I think it's something that I don't think it will be as simple as just bringing John Souttar in and asking him to fill that void. Connor Goldson has played almost every game in these last few seasons. John Souttar, obviously, again, probably through no fault of his own, has missed a lot of football. But then can you rely on him to come and fill that void of Goldson playing every minute in the Premiership? I don't know. So I'm a big fan of him. I think under Van Bronckhorst he's improved, as a lot of players have, and I really hope he does stay. I agree with you, Johnny. I think it seems unlikely. Saying that, it might be a case that Van Bronckhorst says, look, for the money that we're going to have to spend to get someone who can replace what this guy does, it might be worth breaking that wage structure. I know that's probably not his decision, but the circumstances could have changed because of a new manager, so we'll just have to wait and see.
The other story that's doing the rounds, I think I saw it on Sky Sports earlier on yesterday, was Glen Kamara and Aston Villa. Now, listen, the stories linking players to Steven Gerrard are going to be incessant over this summer. There's no doubt about it. Villa have got money. Rangers have got players that Steven Gerrard knows it's absolutely inevitable that there's going to be a number of links. I'm surprised that we haven't already started the sort of Ryan Kent to Aston Villa saga, because that's definite. It's just definite that's going to happen, isn't it? Where would you stand on this, Josh, and the Villa links in general? Knowing Gerrard as you do, is there any player that stands out based on what he has at Villa that would be an obvious one for him to come back and try and pinpoint, and especially the links with Kamara? Do you feel that would be a goer in the winter break, and how Rangers would go to replace him if that came about?
I think the two obvious ones for me are Kamara and Aribo. Kent I think would be up there, but I think you look at the players at Aston Villa having that front three with Buendia, who's I think an Argentinian international, Leon Bailey, who Rangers fans will remember from the game just before lockdown against Bayer Leverkusen. Watkins plays kind of off that left forward role sometimes. I think you look in that midfield three and there'd be a space for Glen Kamara, knows the system very well. Joe Aribo too. But Joe Aribo might be looking at it and thinking, you know what, I'm quite enjoying playing with a bit more freedom than having to be one of those shuttlers in the midfield three. But I think they're the obvious two, and I think you can clearly see from Gerrard's team selection he had favourites, as most managers do, and Kamara and Aribo and probably Kent were three of those. And what you would say about Kamara is Rangers are obviously in a really strong bargaining position because they've got him contracted for another 4 years or whatever it is. But I think certainly looking at that left central midfield role, I know Gerrard used Douglas Luiz there so far since going down. John McGinn's played well for him. But I think Glen Kamara would inevitably will move to the Premiership at one stage. Like you say, though, the links are just going to be incessant because of the obvious, and it'll be hard to read through. But I think Kamara and Aribo for me are the two. Also, maybe I guess there's an argument for Barisic, given the kind of change in fullbacks at Rangers and what they require. But obviously the great emphasis placing them down south. I know Target scored at the weekend, and that actually scored another goal for Gerrard. So maybe he'll be quite happy with them. But I have no doubt, like you, that the links will be continuous. And but Kamara for me, I agree, he's the one that most likely to go and probably is the one at the top of the list, along with the Aribo at the moment.
We've got a question here from Graham Wright, Joshua, that I'm not going to put up on screen because he's used a nickname for Allan McGregor that's just not appropriate for this time in the morning. So I'll let you work out for yourself what that might be. And he asks, would you bring Nikola Katic back? I would, plus sign Stephen Davis and Allan McGregor up to... would you... I can't actually work out what that second part means. But would you bring in Nikola Katic in the January window if you could, Josh? I've got to be honest, I don't think this one's even on the agenda. I think Nikola Katic will be spending the entire year there. But anyway, if it was an option, would you do it?
No. Again, I think you look at that game against St Mirren at the weekend, you look at how both centre-backs contributed, especially with one deep midfielder. You think of Calvin Bassey, because he's a left-back, his ability to drive his team up the pitch, dribble through the pitch. Katic doesn't do that, and obviously Goldson as well, who's now such a good distributor of the ball. Katic doesn't do that either. So I personally, I don't really think that he will have a first-team future at Rangers because just because of the way it's went, with the emphasis it's placed on centre-backs having the ball. Even Balogun, I think, who at times takes a touch too many, but he can move into the midfield. He's a better passer of the ball than Katic. So I don't think there's really a need for it. I think personally I'd far rather have Calvin Bassey in there. I don't see Calvin Bassey moving back to left back, given that he's played every game under Van Bronckhorst there, and especially now he's going to have some training pitch time with him over this winter break. So no, I don't see that. In terms of Davis and McGregor, I think it's hard to see Davis getting a new contract now, Jonny, given that he's not played much, and as we've discussed before, you kind of have 4 players for that position: Kamara, Jack, Davis and Lundstrom. 4 big wages in that position, and I'm sure going forward that the club will look to kind of bed in the lineup up from there, if you will, and increase the numbers they have in the number 8 position compared to the number 6. And McGregor, who knows? I mean, you'd have said earlier in the season no, but again, he's come back and kind of shown he's still got it, and he'll be 40, I think, next month. But you know, you've kind of been saying since he came back, oh, this maybe is his last season. This maybe is his last season. Who knows? He certainly has had a good turn of form since Van Bronckhorst come in. Only conceded one in the league. So I think that's slightly more a slight possibility. I don't see Davis, especially given the distance that Kamara has to cover on himself in that position. I don't see Davis having another year. But you know, he's again played probably 2 seasons over what was anticipated when he came back to Ibrox, and I'm sure he'll still play a big part in the second half of the season.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question from James 1. Morning, troops. Genuinely cannot see Haji getting any better. There's surely better options than him going forward. Doesn't offer enough. Josh, we've seen a lot of criticism over the last couple of weeks, and there's no doubt that Jankoshaji isn't really adapting well to this wide chalk in the boots winger role. He was moved inside at the weekend, had a very, very mixed game. And generally in the Van Bronckhorst area, while it seems like the Dutch manager does indeed rate him because he's playing a lot of football, it's just kind of not really fallen into place for him so far. Not for a lack of effort, that's for sure, but so far it hasn't really worked. What's your take on this? Do you think fans need to be a bit more patient with Giannis? There's no doubt, and he's a player of immense talent, is there?
Yeah, no, I think it's just he's going through a frustrating period. You even look, Jonny, at the start of the season when his season was derailed by that challenge against Livingston the opening day. Yeah. Came back against Dundee away and Ross County away, and although those weren't games where he scored a couple of goals and necessarily his numbers haven't been great this season. I'm thinking of the Livingston Cup game as well, where he makes that assist within 2 minutes of coming onto the pitch, and you just do see his quality. And I think the thing is at Rangers, you need this big squad because you need players to step up at different points in the season. As we've seen last season with Arfield coming in at certain points, the Rebo after he'd come back from injury. But Haji, I think you're right, he does need to put a good few games together, because since Van Bronckhorst come in, I don't really think he's had a great game. I don't think that wide right position suits him. I think you've seen with Tavernier and Wright how well they worked against that deep defence. That seems to be the way forward. Equally, I think Haji sometimes, because he makes more outlandish mistakes, you know, he causes quite a lot of turnovers. Sometimes his tackles are a bit of a forward challenge, and that will naturally cause a little bit of irritation. I think in that number 8 position, he could, in home games, work alongside Aribo But I don't see that being an option, certainly in Europe or when you're going away to Tynecastle or whatnot. So he, I think he has the right mentality to fight for his place and fight for his Rangers future in the starting 11. But certainly I think he's less suited than he was to the 210s position under Gerrard, and that's one of the few players, Jonny, I think that we'd say hasn't had a quite an upturn from that system. Haji probably was more dependent on the structures around him, given his lack of pace perhaps, but also his footballing heritage and the type of football that he's used to playing, with quick combination play and whatnot. So yeah, we'll see. But I think he's got the right mentality to fight for his place in that starting 11. That's for sure.
Yeah. Moving on to Aldo 21574. He's asking, how likely is it we'll lose one of our big stars in January? And if so, who? My biggest fear is losing Aribo, as I don't think we're anywhere near as good without him. What are your thoughts? Well, Aldo, I think if a big offer comes in that meets what Rangers are looking for, then I think every player is available. That's the reality of the situation. If Ryan Kent is subject to £20 million bids from Aston Villa, he will be gone. That's the reality of the player trading model that Rangers have in place. But Rangers don't need to sell. They're not in a position where they have to just accept any offer that comes in. It will have to be an offer that suits the club. So that's the situation, really. And if a player does come in, just like Ross Wilson had, if an offer does come in, just like Ross Wilson had Giovanni van Bronckhorst lined up to take over from Steven Gerrard, Ross Wilson will have a list of players to take over. So it's a matter of then going out and asking the management team which one they want to target first, and they go out and they try and get that guy. You've got to have faith in the system the club have put in place, and for me, that's as simple as you can make it. There is no hard and fast at the moment. We've seen the transfer window between 5 and 20 million. Pardon me. Has been very badly affected by COVID, and we just don't know whether or not that's going to be the same this January. I think it'll start to loosen up a little bit, but we've had lockdowns across Europe, and potentially I think there's a lot of teams that could just say, you know what, we're going to keep our powder dry. Joshua, for me, the big one is really contracts. You've got Phil Helander. I think he's only got 18 months left. Joe Aribo, 18 months. Ryan Kent, 18 months. Alfredo Morelos, 18 months. If you allow all these contracts to hit the summer and you don't sell anyone, you've got a huge summer ahead of you. An absolutely huge summer, and you really have to sell them all in the summer. Or if you don't, then you're talking about peanuts for players that are worth multi-millions. Now, we know Celtic did well, and you've got to give them credit. Christopher Ayer and Odsonne Edouard, they got a decent amount of money for them, although not as much as they probably would have if they'd sold them earlier. So there is the option of still being able to do good deals. But to do 4, that seems a lot. For me, I think Rangers need to tie up a couple of these guys if possible. But is that possible? I suppose that's the question.
Well, I think you looked at, with Kamara, I think a lot of people were resigned to the fact that he wouldn't sign an extension, and he did. And I think you or I will have no doubt that the club quietly in the background will be going about their work with these contract extensions. And I think the thing is, the way that Rangers will, in my mind, approach this is, I don't think Glen Kamara anticipates being at Rangers until 2025. If he was, that would be fantastic. But the club are protecting their best assets, and I think there'll be an appreciation probably from the player's point of view of that as well. And I guess as well, hypothetically, say a player did want to move on in another year or so, that would be taken into consideration when the contract is being negotiated. So in my mind, a couple of those players might sign on until 2024, 2025. I think inevitably someone will leave in the summer. And I guess we just have to wait and see who that is. But certainly, I think from supporters' point of view, if you could get a couple of those tied up before the summer, it would make a far more relaxing transfer window experience.
Final question here we're going to take from the watching audience. Jimmy Duff, do you think that because Morelos is banging the goals again, he could be recalled to the Colombia squad? That would be an enormous miss, Josh, wouldn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Old Firm game coming up in February. Morelos banging in the goals. The downside of that is that, Colombia come back in and say, look, we fancy a bit of this. And then he is not playing in that biggest of all games so far this season. I mean, you obviously want Morelos to be in top form, but at the same time, going up against Celtic without Alfredo Morelos is not a situation you want to be, especially with Kemar Roof having the injury problems that he's had. Now, he'll be back by that point, but there's not a lot of depth in that area, is there?
Yeah, you're relying on Roof, and that, I guess, opens up a wider conversation about what Roof's future is in the first team as well, because at the moment it seems the only position, probably like Haji, that, as opposed to playing in those 2-10s, Roof now can only play as the 9, you'd imagine, unless he plays in a Rebos position. I think if you were going into an Old Firm game with Roof up top instead of Morelos, it would be slightly weakened, but not all that much. But then you look at Morelos' performance against St Mirren, and in a funny way, that felt like one of his best Rangers performances in a long time, just because of how dominant he was in the box. So I think, going back to the conversation about contracts and players' value and whatnot, Morelos being in the Colombia squad would do that the world of good. So one of these, I guess, situations where might be a silver lining to it, but if he was to miss the Old Firm, that would be bad luck indeed. I think Celtic could also be missing a couple of big players, so it might just be one of those games. I guess that's what happens when the fixtures moved. We'll just have to wait and see. I certainly think Rangers at the moment have the kind of superior depth of squads, if that were to be the case.
Right, okay. We're going to call it a day there. Josh, thanks for everyone who's watched. Obviously, if you want to get more from us, you can at the www.rangersreview.co.uk, where you can sign up for just $2.99 per month. That'll give you all the Rangers content that you need. We're putting new stuff up there every day. Pardon my cough. I'm still recovering from COVID, slowly. Obviously, we are going across YouTube. We're going across Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest of it. But if you're on YouTube, please subscribe, as this gives you access to our videos as soon as they become available. You'll get a notification, which is dead handy because we don't just go live in the morning. We go live to cover any breaking news as well. So that's a great way to keep in touch with what we're doing. Until next time, thanks for watching.